Hey Sarah, how's your new book going?
I'm just doing the plot. How about a half-fae teams up with a fallen angel to do a drugs bust?
Sounds great. What about the title?
I got you covered.
The Blood of Earth and House.
The House of Earth and Blood is an urban fantasy come thriller novel by prolific YA author Sarah J. Maas, and her first attempt at a book aimed specifically towards adults. It is part 1 of the Crescent City series and follows Bryce Quinlan, a half-fae, half-human trying to solve the brutal murder of her best friend, Danica. As the book opened with very little meat and copious amounts of exposition, I suppose I'll do the same. Crescent City is a city. There's also another place called Pangera, which may or may not be where Crescent City is, and there's a war between the humans and the Vanir. No, not the Vanir of Norse myth. Here, Vanir is a catch-all term for anyone who isn't a boring, uncivilized human. Crescent City is split into several sections. There's a fairy bit, the mermaid bit, the werewolf bit, the dead bit, the human bit, and the red light district. Plus some other, probably, but I forgot what they are. There are these fancy gates made of gemstones, and they're all kind of like this book's version of Facebook because people use them to broadcast unfunny memes across the city. There's this fancy horn thing that went missing once in a blackout that people want for reasons. So yeah, Bryce works for an antiquities dealer who is also the main representative of the sorcerers, which seems like it should be a big deal, but it's really not. Bryce is half fae, half human, so she has silky golden skin and silky red hair and walks silkily around whilst emitting her silky purr and seducing all the males with her silky smile. But she's also half human, so she's literally trash. Just hot, silky trash. Okay, so seriously. Bryce's best friend Danica is brutally murdered along with the others in Danica's wolf pack, the Pack of Devils. After being depressed for 2 years, the murders begin again and Bryce is forced to partner up with the Umbra Mortis, the Shadow of Death. A fallen angel enslaved after he and a few others try to rebel against someone. Full disclosure, I forgot a lot of the background stuff. I forgot a lot of the foreground stuff as well. But anyway, Umbra Mortis, aka Hunt's some bugger, and what's her face, Bryce, are in a race against time to catch whoever or whatever is behind this before this summit meeting where a bunch of fancy pants people meet up to show off their swag. And if they fail, Hunt will continue to be a slave, and if they succeed, his freedom will be within reach. Helped along the way by the Fey Prince Rune and his cohorts, Bryce's co-walker Leheba, the Fire Sprite, and her pet Chimera, and a bunch of other males and females whose names I've forgotten, will they reach the bottom of this blood-soaked mystery? Essentially, a snarky but beautiful badass lady teams up with a rude but beautiful badass dude to go on a murder mystery, which turns into a thriller, which turns into an action flick, whilst waxing angst about their tragic backstories, but with fairies. I would like to start by saying there is a good story buried deep, deep, deep within this book. But Sarah is not a good enough writer to tell it. The bare bones of the mystery are, I think, okay. It's difficult to tell through all the other nonsense, and the last 100 or 200 pages are actually acceptable. Not great, but better than the first 600 or 700 pages. Probably because Maas finally gave up on the info dumps and dipped into a few tropes I am a sucker for. I could have done without watching the first part of the finale through someone else's POV, watching everything happen on a screen like at the cinema, but maybe I'm being picky. Also, there are otters. They work as messengers for the watery people and they wear little official vests, and that is great. Characters are pretty bland, they are basically walking, talking cardboard cutouts. The stunningly beautiful, kick-ass, strong, independent woman who don't need no man until she does. The tortured, domineering love interest constantly angsting over his tragic past. Everyone else who is just there to make them look cool. The brother she can snark at, the friend she can be angsty about for not understanding her pain. The boss who literally lets her get away with anything. And of course the legion of men thirsting over the MC's perfect ass. As I think everyone has said, the world building here leaves much to be desired. It's extremely broad, lots of places and history and species and relationships and politics are thrown at you, but there's no real depth. I couldn't really tell you anything about any of those things, just that they exist. And like, I know there are shifters, but I don't know anything about their culture. I know that Crescent City is a city, and then there's a country called Pangea. I can't remember anything else about them. I don't even know if Crescent City is in Pangea. It was probably mentioned about 50 million times, but with no elegance or beauty or purpose, and therefore I forgot. There's a war going on somewhere, but no one really cares about it, and I will get back to that later. There are about a bajillion different species of veneer in Crescent City, with a house and divisions and subdivisions and councils and sections and gates and stuff. And don't get me started on the drop. For something that's mentioned so often and that features so heavily in the finale, I didn't really understand anything about it until the end, and even then, only sort of get it. There are passages in this book which read like they're written in another language because of all the fancy specific terminology that means nothing to anyone. I understand the struggle of communicating a complex world without the narrative of the newcomer, but pages upon pages upon pages of info dumps with a light sprinkling of actual plot and action is not the way. This book is far longer than it needed to be. As I said earlier, the last sections are okay. They're not great, but they're okay. This book would have been far improved if all of the padding and filler had been cut out and written instead like a fast-paced mystery thriller to get to the action-packed ending quicker instead of dragging it out with stuff. I don't even know what it was dragged out with. I can't remember anything from the middle of this book apart from Bryce's fancy red hair and her perfect ass. That is all of it. One way they could have easily reduced this book by about a third would be to just cut out all of the unnecessary swearing. I would admit I am a bit of a prude. I don't particularly care for swearing, but I do understand that it has its place in life and literature to further the setting, characters' attitudes, emotions, it instills shock, choice moments. But this book drops about 10 F-bombs every page. It's distracting and childish and detrimental to the tone. From what I can tell, the only real difference between her YA books and this book, her first actual adult book, is the amount of swearing, which ironically makes it more juvenile. It's fairly obvious that this book is trying to be a fantasy, a murder mystery, a thriller, and a romance all rolled into one, but it's also trying to be a sort of social commentary, and fails badly. She tries to talk about sex positivity by having her main character constantly sleep around and objectify every man, or male, she sees whilst looking down on sex workers. Maas tries to talk about body positivity through Bryce having the wrong body type to be a dancer. You see, instead of being a lithe, flat twig, Bryce has curves. She has an amazing butt and ample boobies. How tragic it is for her to be cursed with society's idea of the pinnacle of physical attraction. What an icon. I hope she can help those struggling with a big butt, big boobs, thin waist issues too. Someone name a charity after her, please. Maas also tries to bring in more POC into her cast list, sort of. There is a lot of speculation about Hunt and Fury being Asian coded, but I didn't really see that. Not to say that it isn't there, it's just not very obvious. The only character I distinctly remember as not being white was Juniper, the fawn, and taking into account a pretty horrendous history of black people being referred to and depicted as animals as a way to dehumanise them and therefore keep them firmly under the boot of white superiority, perhaps making one of the few unambiguously black characters a fawn, as in part deer, was not Maas's brightest idea. I didn't particularly care for the romanticising of drug use and alcohol consumption. It felt very normalised in this world, along with the constant partying, swearing, sex, violence and general sleaze, that it was uncomfortable to read. And yeah, that's going to be linked to me being a little prudish, but it's all just too much. Like, where are the patches of light? And you need those moments of light. Without them, the darkness just sort of looks grey, and grey is dull. It was all too one tone. It could have worked if this book had done more with the human side of things. The drugs and the parties could have been a way for those with near immortality to feel something after so many years of existing. But no, that's not it at all. Which leads me on to the human veneer conflict, which is atrociously handled. Firstly,
we're in a war, man!
And the characters barely acknowledge it. Within the reams of exposition, we get drips of history and politics surrounding humans who lived on this world before the Vanir occupied it. Read conquered, humans who are essentially second-rate citizens, downtrodden and sneered at by their superior Vanir. Humans who are kept as food by the Vanir. Humans who have no representation in council, no protection from attacks to the city, no prospects, no rights, no hope for the future. Humans whose efforts in science and technology were all but expunged from the records by the Vanir after they colonised the country. Humans whose only representation in the book is limited to Bryce's parents who turn up at the end and do nothing. Read Redner, who is looked down on by the narrative for having a personal trainer and wearing well-fitting clothes that accentuate his best features, despite the narrative being in the POV of Bryce, who does the exact same thing. And Philip Briggs, the revolutionist, the only character fighting for human rights to end the oppression, the cruelty, the death, the eating of humans, and he's branded a villain. So he sets off a few bombs and tries to kill Vanir before being arrested. The Vanir are doing 10 times worse to the humans and getting away with it. It's like writing a film about white people invading North America and then making this guy your hero. By all means, show the atrocities performed by both sides if you want. Have nuance, use that morally grey area. But if you're going to comment on the evil deeds performed by the oppressed, don't pretend they're any worse than what led them to take these actions in the first place. And you know what makes this worse? This book had the perfect setup to discuss the subject, because Bryce, the main character, is half and half. Half and half, but that internal struggle that could and should have echoed the actual war happening outside the city between the Vanir and humans is nowhere to be found. The only mentions we have of her human half is when she angsts that people look down on her for it, and the odd character calling her a half-breed, despite the fact that most people don't seem to care because they're too busy drooling over her perfect ass. Hunt actually has a very similar problem. For all the angsting over people fearing him and disliking him and looking down on him as the Umbra Mortis, the killer, we don't really see any evidence. It which just makes him sound like a moody teenager being all, "You don't understand me, Mom." You can't just tell us they're angsting, you just show us. Anyway, back with Bryce. This could have been somewhat redeemed. Not fully, because holy cow, there is no coming back from making this guy the hero, by having her human side play an important role. But it doesn't. The big finale ending, spoilers by the way, is about her discovering her Fae side, despite only making up half her DNA. She's super special and powerful and amazing, and more than makes up for her lame human DNA. And I mean, it's just not written well. The dialogue is dull and tries so hard to be edgy and snarky and funny, but it just comes across as cringe. The attempts at making it sound not like Earth were limited to audio mail instead of voicemail and God's damned and a couple of God's names, despite God's or religion never really playing a part, I think. And constant use of hell, but not hell like this, which is more jarring than you'd expect. The mishmash of random words from various mythologies was pretty confusing, incoherent, and just lazy. The descriptions suck. The only character I can really picture is Bryce, and that's just because she has this huge red ponytail at one point, and she's constantly flicking it over her shoulder, despite it being waist length, so how is it always flicking in front of her shoulder? The constant sexualizing of literally everyone is exhausting. The pointless details of our outfits is rampant and pointless. The pacing just sucks. The plot twists are weak and predictable. The whole hoo-ha about Bryce's relationship with the fairy prince Rune is the worst attempt at dramatic irony I have ever seen in my life. And if you are going to have multiple POVs, they need to stand out from each other and feel like they come from separate characters. And the surprise betrayal at the literary equivalent of the mid-season finale. Really? They never thought about it once during their many POV chapters? That is not how you write POVs, and not how you do plot twists. No. In conclusion, I don't know why people like this book. I don't know why it has so many 5-star reviews. Maybe physical copies of this book are imbued with light speed or whatever. I don't know, but it sucks. It robbed me of several hours of my life and more brain cells than I can afford to lose. So thanks for watching, comment or whatever. I'm too gone to care. And now I would like to end on a quote from this masterpiece, which I think sums up the book pretty well. His eyes flickered. Whatever the f that meant.